Once upon a time, in a very popular church in Enugu, stood a peculiar rule that every member obeyed without question. All eyes must be shut during prayers or get ready to face the consequences of disobedience. Because of this rule, no children were allowed in the church, not even babies, as the church was seen as a holy place, a place for serious people who were desperate for answers, people who had exhausted every hospital or hope that they ever had. In fact, it was widely believed that a person's dedication to obey the strange rule was what resulted in the miracle. The more tightly you shut your eyes, the faster your prayers will be answered, and thousands of people testify to the truth of this. Blind women received their sight, barren women gave birth to triplets, and even the dead was raised back to life. No one ever joked with the rule after people who dared to flout it lost their sight and died mysteriously. News of this spread like wildfire, and people began to whisper in corners, wondering if the church's power came from God or something else entirely. However, desperation still took many to the church. One day, a woman named Omoni held her lifeless baby in her arms and ran to the church from the hospital. She had just given birth to her 10th baby, who was born lifeless like the other nine. Omoni could not bear it any longer. She had heard of the miracles that people received from the church and believed that the church had what it took to save her child. Hours later, she arrived at the church premises with her baby in her arms, exhausted and broken, as she pleaded for the church to save her. Please, save my child, she cried out at the gates of the church, but the officials refused to let her in. They turned her back because children were prohibited from entering the church. Rules are rules, sister, the usher said coldly to her as he avoided looking into her tear-filled eyes. Omoni fell to her knees on the hard pavement, wailing, "But he's not just a child, he's dead, please." Still, the gates remained shut. A small crowd had gathered. Among them was a young man named Tokou, a university dropout turned photographer who had come to the church only out of curiosity after hearing about his so-called miracles. He watched the drama from a distance and knew that something did not sit right with him. How could a church, a place of healing and compassion, turn away a mother with a dead child? When the ushers finally chased the grieving woman away like a stray dog, Tochukwu followed her down the road to talk to her. He met her collapsed by the roadside, holding her baby in her arms as she cried out loud. "I'm sorry for what they did to you," Tochukwu said softly as he knelt beside her. "I've been going to that church for 5 years," Omoni whispered as tears poured down her eyes. "I never missed a vigil. They promised me that one day my child would live. They said I had to follow the rules, close my eyes and never question the rule. I did as they instructed, but yet my babies died again and again, 10 of them, despite doing all that the church had told me to do." Tochukwu clenched his jaw on hearing this. He knew something was definitely wrong. If this place truly had the power of God, your child would have been welcome, not rejected, he said as his eyes lifted to the looming gates of the church. Something inside of him snapped. He returned home that evening and could not take his mind off the poor woman who he met by the church. Tochukwu had always heard rumors about the church but paid no mind to them until now. He remembered the story that he heard about a man whose wife ran mad in the church. Tochukwu could not help but ask questions. He approached the woman's family to get their story, and the woman's husband revealed to him that his wife ran mad during a Sunday service. Everyone attributed her madness to her family's lineage of mental illness, but deep down, I believe that the church had something to do with it. Tochukwu sat there stunned. He wondered if truly the church had a hand in all these strange happenings. He returned home and met his friend Nedu, who had once visited the church with his girlfriend, and Nedu narrated how he had almost opened his eyes during prayer, just out of curiosity, when something strange brushed his face. "I swear, bro, it was like a hand though, and it brushed my face. feeling my entire body with goosebumps. My girlfriend tried to convince me that it was the Holy Spirit, but the terror I felt in that moment was nothing like the Holy Spirit though. It felt evil and dark, and I swore never to step my foot there again. I even heard that the pastor's wife went mute during a service. No one has seen her ever since, as the pastor came out to reveal that she had relocated out of the country to open new branches abroad. I believe something happened to her, and the pastor is covering it up. Nedu said to Tochukwu, who sat there wondering if all these were true. Night came, and Tochukwu found it hard to sleep. His thoughts swirled around Omoni, around her dead baby, who was blatantly rejected despite their condition. In that moment, Tochukwu decided to dig out the truth. He was going to the church, not only to confirm his convictions, but to open his eyes. It was during the monthly deliverance vigil, and thousands of people were gathered, their heads bowed low in reverence. Tochukwu slipped in quietly, pretending to blend in. Nedu had refused to follow him, warning him that some truths are better left alone, but Tochukwu did not listen. He had to know. So, he sat in the middle of the church, his eyes shut like everyone else as the prayers began. The voice of the pastor echoed through the loudspeakers as he called down fire, healing, rain, and restoration. The entire church was completely silent as everyone shut their eyes and dared not to open them. Then, Tochukwu opened his eyes. At first, everything looked normal, but within seconds, the illusion shattered. The altar had transformed as evil beings surrounded the pastor, who bowed to them in reverence as they all began to attach their heads to worshippers whose eyes were all shut. People were groaning with their eyes shut closed, unaware that their life essence was being pulled out of them like threads of light, unraveling from their souls. Tochukwu turned to his left, and the beings had surrounded a pregnant woman who had no idea what was happening. Their evil heads were bowed towards her swollen belly as one of them reached out with a thin dark arm and pierced her stomach gently like a hand sliding into water. The woman did not notice anything. Her eyes were closed as her hands remained lifted in worship. Tochukwu was so terrified. He tried so hard not to scream as he shut his eyes, hoping that nothing evil happens to him. But as his eyes closed, something strange began to happen. Tochukwu went mute in that instant. He tried to speak but couldn't, as his lips felt as though they had been shut by an unseen force. Immediately, he felt a wave of dizziness and fell to the ground unconscious. Hours later, Tochukwu woke up to find himself sleeping in his home. He jolted upright, drenched in sweat, as his heart thundered in his chest. For a moment, Tochukwu believed that it had all been a dream. The church, the beings, the whispers, as well as the pregnant woman. But when he tried to speak, nothing came out. His lips parted, but no sound followed. Panic rose in his throat as he rushed to the mirror to look at his face. His mouth looked fine, no swelling, no bruises. But when he tried to scream again, it was like his voice had been stolen. Tochukwu stood there terrified. He could not understand what was happening. He searched his pocket for his phone, but found a strange paper instead. It was an address, and Tochukwu wondered how it got there. The handwriting was not his, and the ink was faint but clear. 12 Covenant Street. Asked for Elijah. Tochukwu did not know any Elijah, but something about the message pulled at him like a lifeline. Tochukwu did not waste time. He got into his car and by evening, he arrived at the location. It was a small church, which looked old and worn. It had no loudspeakers, no flashy banners, just a wooden sign that welcomed people into the presence of the Lord. Tochukwu walked into the church but found it empty. Inside was a single man, kneeling at the altar praying in silence. He approached the man, who smiled at him and welcomed him into the presence of God. "I'm Elijah," the young man said to Tochukwu, who tried to speak but couldn't. He pulled out a pen from his pocket and scribbled on a paper. "My name is Tochukwu, and I was told to come meet you here. I broke the rule of miracle missions, and now I can't speak." The man's eyes widened in terror. "You are in danger, Mr. Tochukwu. You brought something back with you from that evil church. and he has to be cast out, or else in 3 days you'll be dead, he said to Tochku, who began to regret his decision to attend the church. He remembered his friend's warning and wished that he listened to him. Pastor Elijah, seeing how worried he looked, told him that he could be of help. He anointed his head with oil and began to pray for Tochku, who felt a sudden hotness in his body. His temperature began to rise in a way that he hadn't done before, and after hours of praying, Tochku finally felt his voice return. It was as if a weight was lifted off his body as Tochku screamed out the name of Jesus. His voice was back, and he could not believe that he could speak again. He thanked the pastor for saving his life as he narrated all that happened in the evil church. However, Tochku could not understand how he got to his house. He could not understand how the note got into his pocket or who could have put it there. Nothing made sense to him as he stood there confused. In that moment, he remembered that he had a body camera on the whole time. Tochku quickly took off the camera and noticed that it had truly been recording. He took off the memory card and handed it to the pastor, who grabbed his laptop and began to play the video. As the footage played, the small screen flickered with scenes from the video. The video was shaky, but the moment Tochku opened his eyes, everything changed. The camera captured it all. The altar shifting, the demonic beings floating above the crowd, the pastor bowing to dark forces, the evil beings draining life from unsuspecting worshippers. Even Elijah stepped back. "My God," he whispered. "This is no longer just about warning people. This is evidence." He turned to Tochku, his voice steady now. "We must expose them, and we must act fast," he said to Tochku, who fast-forwarded the video and was shocked at what he saw. It was Pastor Joshua, the pastor of Miracle Missions, the same pastor who Tochku saw bowing down to the creatures on the pulpit. The same Pastor Joshua was the one who dropped him home and left the note in his pocket. Tochku could not believe his eyes. He stood there confused as he heard a car pull up outside the church. It was Pastor Joshua, who walked into the church with his head bowed. For years, Pastor Joshua had been looking for a way to combat the evil that had overtaken his church. He tried praying, but his prayers held no power over them because of the covenant that he had with the spirits. Pastor Joshua regretted all he did 10 years ago when a fellow pastor, Odili, convinced him to seek power for accelerated growth. Pastor Odili had once been a humble preacher with a small following and a desperate heart. One night, after weeping bitterly over his stagnant church, he met a man in white who offered him power and influence. The man gave him a small vial filled with a dark oil and instructed him to pour it into the foundation of his church at midnight, warning that his members must not open their eyes during prayers. Odili obeyed, and from that day on, his church began to grow rapidly, but this growth was not from God. The spirits demanded secrecy and sacrifice. Those who opened their eyes went mad, blind, or died, but Odili did not care. Eventually, he passed the final vial to Pastor Joshua, warning him only to keep the rule, never revealing the true price that he had to pay. Pastor Joshua at the time only had a handful of people in his church. They could barely afford plastic chairs, let alone pay rent for the hall that they used. His wife, Mabel, begged him to be patient, that true revival took time, but Pastor Joshua was so desperate. He wanted miracles, he wanted crowds, he wanted power and influence. So when Pastor Odili handed him the vial of oil, Joshua poured it in the foundation of his church at midnight, not caring about the consequences. The moment the oil touched the ground, Pastor Joshua felt a strong wind blow against his body. It was as if something had shifted, as if an invisible gate had been unlocked in his church. Within weeks, miracles began to happen. The sick received instant healing, and the people began to troop into the church in their thousands. The offering baskets overflowed with money, and Pastor Joshua gained fame across the state. He even began to plan crusades, healing the sick wherever he went, but this came at a great cost. The spirits wanted more from him. They gave him the strange rule, knowing how difficult it would be for people to keep their eyes shut during prayers. Even his wife Mabel who the people believed was abroad opening new branches for their church, was locked up in a room in his house, mute and disoriented. She opened her eyes during a prayer meeting, and the spirit struck her with the strange affliction of silence and madness. She hadn't spoken a word in 5 years. Pastor Joshua said quietly, as tears ran down his face. I feed her, I clean her, but she just stares. Her eyes never close, not even in sleep. Pastor Elijah and Tochu stood in stunned silence. I want to end this. Pastor Joshua continued. I want to tear down the altar, destroy every trace of the covenant, but I'm afraid. I need your help. That's why I'm here. You are the only pastor I know whose hands are clean. The only pastor who remained content and dedicated to the word despite societal pressure and expectations. He said to Pastor Elijah, who looked at him and promised to help. It's not going to be an easy battle, but with God on our side, victory is assured, he said to Pastor Joshua, who stood there shaking as he watched Pastor Elijah pack up a bag and follow him. They arrived at the church a few minutes later, and Pastor Elijah requested to see the exact spot where the evil oil was dropped. Pastor Joshua took him to the spot, and Elijah knelt quietly, placing his hand on the ground. The moment his palm touched the floor, the air shifted. A low rumble echoed from beneath the church as the lights flickered violently. A foul smell oozed from the floor, like rotten flesh, as Elijah shut his eyes and began to pray. The evil beings rose from the ground as they tried to stop him, but his prayers banished them completely, rendering their powers useless. Pastor Joshua was so grateful to finally be free. He handed himself willingly to the authorities, who invaded his church and shut it down permanently. The footage from Tochuk's body camera was aired on national TV, sending shockwaves across the nation. People wept, some fainted, others came forward to testify about the strange things that they had experienced at the church but we are too afraid to talk about. Mabel, Pastor Joshua's wife, finally began to speak as she regained her sanity and left the room where she had been locked up for years. And just like that, the veil was lifted. What was once called Miracle Missions was now known as the Evil Church. Thousands who once swore by the strange miracles now trembled in shame and horror. The people learned the hard way that not every miracle comes from God and not every pastor is called by him. The lesson to be learned from this story is that desperation should never replace discernment. Not every place that performs miracles is truly from God, and not every pastor is led by the Spirit of truth. Evil often hides behind appearances of holiness, using fear, manipulation, and strange doctrines to control the vulnerable. As believers, we must seek God for ourselves and test every spirit. A true church welcomes the broken, uplifts the weak, and never demands blind obedience. Keep your eyes open in life because the enemy thrives where ignorance and silence dwell. I hope you enjoyed the story.